Welcome, everybody. My name is Allison Wickens. I'm Vice President for Education here at George Washington's Mount Vernon, and I'm thrilled to be launching this book officially. It doesn't go on sale anywhere else but Mount Vernon until May 12th. But you can get it here May 2nd at Mount Vernon, both outside the talk after it's over, and then also over at the shops if you decide you want to buy lots more copies. Tim will be signing immediately following the book talk, and we'll have the opportunity to chat with you about the book as well. Now, I'm going to steal the mic just for a little bit to tell you that I've known Tim for 30 years. When we met when we were 2, I'm sure.
Yes.
And he has been a champion of history and education in my life and for thousands of audiences in all of his public history work, and reaching millions of people with all of his nonfiction history book writing. And I think one of the things that inspires me about Tim's work is how dedicated he is to connect young people with primary sources. And that was critical to us when I, as the Vice President for Education here, set forth to recreate the Education Center, which is open now for visitors. And that exhibit was initially opened in 2006. And when we wanted to re-engage it in 2026, we wanted to find someone who could really help us do that, and I reached out to Tim, who has a way with words and a way with young people and a way with primary sources. And so in addition to bringing all of that talent to the exhibition, which if you haven't been there yet, I encourage you to go there while you're here today, he brought that to this amazing book. So it was a wonderful parallel project. This is not your typical exhibit catalog at all. This is just a wonderful biography of an amazing person in George Washington. I want to take just a little second here, and I have to read off my phone, but the book has been getting amazing reviews so far. And the New Kirkus review of this book says, an illuminating character study on our first commander-in-chief in peace and war. When working on his script for the upcoming Mount Vernon exhibition into a clear and coherent profile, Tim Grove presents the major events of Washington's career in a way that shed light on his evolving beliefs and values. George, as he's commonly dubbed throughout, comes off as a lifelong reader who combined book learning, travel, and reliance on experts to make himself not only a successful military and political leader, but an innovative experimental farmer. So I will join Tim and this image of Washington's books behind us for a little questions and answers. I get the fuzzy microphone.
That's a great microphone.
So Tim, tell me a little bit about why you got into writing books for children.
Well, I'll start with history. Why I like history. How about that?
Okay. Tim's driving the question.
So when I was young, my parents were wonderful about taking me to historic sites, and I grew up in eastern Pennsylvania, so I was local to Philadelphia, Washington, Baltimore. I remember my first trip to Mount Vernon. I can't remember how old I was, but I do remember that. But something in that, being on site, inspired me. It helped me understand history because I could picture where it happened. So I've always loved historic sites. I always make it one of my missions to encourage parents to take their kids to historic sites because it's very, very, very important, I think, to foster that interest in history.
Well, and I really appreciate the foreword that you have in this book, or the afterwards. You talk about
Oh,
your
yeah.
visit to Mount Vernon as
Right.
a young person.
Right.
And it's nice to really make that connection between going to museums and historic sites and really feeling connected to the history. It's wonderful.
But as far as writing for that age, so I've been writing for ages 10 to 14. Not all of my books are that age, but this is my 5th book for that age group. And I was working at the National Air and Space Museum and working on an exhibition there called Pioneers of Flight, and it had a plane in it called the Chicago, which was one of 4 that were the first around the world. And I'd never really thought about that story. I didn't really know that story. And I got so enamored with that story and realized it's a grand adventure story and no one had written about it. And the museum archives had the actual diary or journal of one of the mechanic that went on that plane. And I was sitting on a landmine, I mean a gold mine, sitting on a gold mine of primary source materials about that flight. And so my publisher Abrams was working with someone else in the museum on a kid's book, and they were having a good experience, and they said, can anyone else pitch another kid's book? So I pitched this to them, never thinking I would write a kid's book, and that was my first kid's book, and it got a lot of attention. It was up for a national award, my first one, so that was the beginning of kids' books. But
what's a little bit about, tell me a little bit about your writing process.
So it's a challenge, certainly, to write nonfiction, because there has to be oh, we have a special guest. Oh, my word.
I do apologize. I hope I am not interrupting. I understand there is a gentleman here who has written a book about me, and as no one has done that yet, I thought I should perhaps come and investigate for myself. Mr. Grove.
General.
Your servant, sir.
General, it is an honor to meet you.
Oh, it is an honor to be commemorated in so beautiful a tome.
Oh, have you seen?
That's a much younger version of me. Though I suppose every portrait is a younger version of yourself, is it not? It was quite flattering, sir.
Well,
might I join
have
you?
a few minutes for a short conversation?
I can spare a little time for someone who's so interested in my world and my work.
So was so interested to learn that you have called yourself a lifelong learner.
Oh, yes.
And these are some images of your books.
Oh, yes.
You have quite a collection, right? A library?
I do. At this point, I have some, depending on how one takes count, some 900 volumes in my library. As anyone's library might, it ebbs and flows over time. And it has been greater or lesser at various times. But about 900 books, some of which are actually pamphlets that I've had bound. A collection of pamphlets on a certain subject, take them to a bookbinder, and he will bind them into a tome so that they do not wear out.
So in my research, I learned that there were 4 main ways that you continued your learning throughout your life, and one was reading. You loved to read, and can you tell a little bit about, you certainly didn't have a library when you were a young man. You had to go to neighbors who had a library?
That is correct. I was fortunate to have neighbors, but one thing that some here will not realize is that I did not have much in the way of a formal education. My 2 elder half-brothers had been educated over in England. However, one of the greatest tragedies of my life is my father passed when I was just 11 years of age. And because of that, had he lived perhaps a year or 2 longer, I might have been educated over in England like my elder half-brothers were, but that was denied me. And from that point on, I was the man of the house. I had 4 younger siblings to take care of. I did not have time to go to school, per se. But fortunately, as you mentioned, I did not at that time, there were not many books in the household. My mother was not a great keeper of books. However, I did have a neighbor, Colonel Fairfax, who had something of an extensive library for a Virginia country gentleman, and I was able to borrow books from him. As a matter of fact, there is one book that I borrowed from him that I believe I kept for 20-some years. So.
Was that one on surveying?
The Complete Surveyor was the name of that book. And that actually brings an interesting topic. You mentioned that I continued to learn by reading. I wanted to advance myself, and I thought perhaps I should have a career in the Navy, but my honored mother decided that that was not for me.
Yes, I was fascinated to learn that fact about you.
Yes.
It could have changed the course of history had you joined Navy.
Perhaps it might have. First off, the likelihood is that I would have drowned before anyone knew the name George Washington. But also, yes, it could have very much, had I lived, it could have changed the course of history, I suppose, although I don't believe history is ever dependent on just one man. However, my father had bequeathed to me his surveying tools, and so I decided to, as many gentlemen, property owners do here in Virginia, I decided to learn the surveying art and thought I could make something of myself in that way. And in order to do that, I borrowed this book, The Complete Surveyor, from my neighbor, Colonel Fairfax, and I taught myself the measuring of land and geometrical problems that were in the book. And then I was able to, with that knowledge, I was able to go to the College of William and Mary. I did not study at the College of William and Mary. That is simply where I was certified as a surveyor. And once I was certified as a surveyor, that opened up avenues of employment for me that would not have been available. And that is the moment that I realized that education was not without my grasp. Even though I had been denied a formal education as I had so longed for, I could still find books on whatever subject I was interested in and educate myself.
And you actually ended up having a published book yourself, I believe, in 1754, at
Correct.
21 years of age. A journal that you kept ended up
22,
being
but
published.
yes.
22.
I was, well, to say that I published it is not quite accurate.
Right, it was published.
It was published, yes, but it was the Journals of Major George Washington, and it was my journals of the military operations that I was involved with from the very beginning of my commission in 1753 through into 1754, and it was I had been tasked by Governor Dinwiddie, the Royal Governor of Virginia, to deliver an ultimatum to the highest ranking French officer that I could find, and I ended up finding him upon the actually almost all the way up to Lake Erie. I think I was 15 or 20 miles away from Lake Erie when I finally found a man I could deliver this to. And I kept track of all those adventures, which included getting swept away and falling out of a canoe, as I, though as some have suggested, I was not a child at the time. I was actually, it was just before, a month before I turned 22 years of age. But these adventures made, I suppose, for good reading, Governor Dinwiddie thought, and also I think that it was something, it was propaganda against the French, that we had made overtures to them to try to remain peaceful, and so the governor had it published. But yes, so I do suppose I am a published author, and therefore qualified to sit on a stage with such an august presence.
But I understand even London publishers ended up.
That is correct.
So your name spread far and wide because of this.
That is correct. Now that is the first book, but not the last book. Because of course, the following year, after the defeat at Fort Necessity, my only defeat I should say, when they were rifling through our baggage, the French soldiers found my journal. And it was published in Paris. So I suppose I can say I'm an internationally published author. However, that one, I did not wish to have published. But
so along with reading, as far as lifelong learning, one way I think that my research reveals is that you value the expertise of experts.
Oh.
So you surround yourself with people who know about things that you do not know.
you are correct. I think it is a good practice, whatever it may be. It's certainly in government I have done this. As Chief Magistrate of the Nation, I chose a cabinet that had expertise in areas that I did not. Alexander Hamilton was brilliant with finance and government, and so I chose him to be my Secretary of Treasury. I had Thomas Jefferson as my Secretary of State. Now, Thomas Jefferson and I disagreed on many different things, but he had more knowledge of international statecraft and foreign affairs than I did, because he was more well-traveled than I. And so I chose him. Some people marvel at this, and of course, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson never agreed on anything. And I would ask my cabinet members, I would ask Edmund Randolph or Mr. Jefferson or Colonel Hamilton, I would ask them for, if it was a question of foreign affairs, I would ask all of them, not just Thomas Jefferson. I would ask all of them because I wanted to hear all their opinions, even if they were different, even if they conflicted with mine, because I think you will find in this life that only a weak and ineffectual leader surrounds himself with people who always agree with him.
And people, so you spent many years improving this grand estate here, Mount Vernon, and looking for innovative ways. And one of the people that you can serve as an expert was Arthur Young.
Yes, Arthur
Tell us
Young
about
is an
your
English
correspondence.
horticulturalist, and I, although we've never met in the flesh, we exchanged correspondence for many years, correspondence and seeds. We would write back and forth and give each other seeds and advice on planting. And both Mr. Young and I are proponents of an older English horticulturalist who was writing a book right around the time I was born. I had the second edition in my library, but the first edition came out the year before, I think, that I was born. I can't recall the exact date of publishing. But the book is called, and I recommend it for anyone who wishes to learn the English system of horticulture. The book is called Horse Hoeing Husbandry, and the author is Jethro Tull. And this is where I used his methods of crop rotation, his methods of the preparation of manure. These were all vital things to learn. And I continued in correspondence with Mr. Young and others in that community because we were testing some of these theories out, and they were going to work differently in Virginia than they will in the east of England, for example.
And I don't know if you know this, but I've been told from good sources that Mr. Young is also an advisor to King George III.
I have heard that from time to time. As I understand, His Majesty is also interested in gardening and horticulture.
So that is a unique
It's not just the name.
condition.
We also share a passion for growing things. And I cannot, of course, read into His Majesty's motivations for it. But they may be similar to mine, and I shall tell you what my motivations are and why the pursuit of this improvement was so important to me. Mount Vernon is some 8,000 acres. If I have a field that fails, I will not starve. However, take a man who has 500 or 1,000 acres, and if one of his fields fail, his family may starve. I could afford to experiment with these methods of horticulture, incorporating them through the use of polling experts in Europe and here in America as well. I could use that knowledge, implement it here, and then I could pass it on to my fellow Virginians and indeed my fellow Americans so that they might improve their own properties. That is how education is meant to be used. It is meant to be learned and then shared.
One more question about experts. We talked about your presidency a little bit, your
Yes.
farming here. What about during the war? Who were some of your experts that you relied on?
Well, we used to have, actually this is important for you all to know, you may not know this. During the course of our war, I held the rank of Major General, and there were other Major Generals. I was simply the Senior Major General and Commander-in-Chief, so I was the one with seniority. But we would actually hold councils of war, and we would talk about these different strategies that we had. For example, the Siege of Boston. Boston, for those of you unfamiliar with it, at least the way that it looks in my day, Boston exists on essentially a peninsula. It's almost an island. It's connected by Boston Neck to the mainland, and around it, it's surrounded by water, or at least swamp, depending on how the tide is and how much rain there's been. So it's ground that cannot really be passed by soldiers particularly easily, can't be marched over. You can only come along this one approach, which sort of works like a drawbridge. If you defend that, your castle is secure. And we needed a way to push the British out of Boston. Now, my idea, we'll take a vote because I believe in democracy. We'll take a vote. This was my idea. I shall let everyone here vote on it to see whether you like it or not, yes or no. And I thought, because we had a cold snap of about 10 days, and part of the water surrounding Boston froze. So now we had the approach on the neck, but there was also from Dorchester to the edge of the neck, we had a passage that was frozen ice, solid enough to move soldiers across, and from Gloucester Point over to the Commons. So we could approach from 3 different angles, and the Royal Navy, of course, had held all the water around, but with the water freezing, they couldn't risk their warships. They had to take those boats and all those cannon out to sea. And so I thought this would be a prime time to attack 3 different vectors across the ice. What do you think? Raise your hand if you think it's a good idea. Put your hands down. Raise your hand if you think it's a bad idea. Raise your hand if you're not voting like most Americans. Well, I would have carried this room, it looks, but I did not in our councils of war. My generals did not approve of that plan, and instead, General Knox, well, he was Colonel Knox at the time, but he eventually becomes General Knox. But Henry Knox, he had been in charge of the fortifications around Boston and Cambridge, and so he had an idea. He said if we had guns, meaning cannon, and we could put them in a position where we could fire into the town, we could force the British to quit the town of Boston. And we did have cannon. Unfortunately, those cannon were located at Fort Ticonderoga in northwestern New York. And there are no roads that go directly from northwestern New York up to Boston town. But he pointed out that once the snow fell, a sled may go someplace that a road may not, that a wagon may not. And so it was not easy. It took 3 months to move these 60 tons of ordnance, all those miles. However, by the beginning of March, I had my cannon. But that idea was not mine. Instead, I relied on one of my generals who had a good idea. Again, listen to people even if you don't agree with them, because you may be swayed or you may adjust your plans based on their information.
Right, so first we had books, second experts. The third way that you continue to learn through life is travel.
Oh.
I'm told that you learn new things when you travel.
Yes.
And you want to say a little bit about Barbados? A lot of people
Oh,
don't know
well,
that you spent
that's
some
that's
time
the
in
farthest I've
Barbados.
ever been. I
Right.
traveled down to Barbados. I was just 19 years of age, and my brother had consumption. My eldest brother Lawrence, who after the passing of my father had become something of a father figure to me. He's 14 years my senior, and he was suffering from consumption. It had been recommended by his physicians that he seek a warmer tropical clime for the winter to try to alleviate the problems with his breathing. Unfortunately, it did not work. However, I traveled down to Barbados, which was a miserable sea voyage, but once I got there, I was experiencing life there in Barbados, and I was meeting with, now keep in mind, this is well before our war for independency, and indeed before any of my military service, before the French and Indian War and all that broke out. But I was there, and I was having a discourse with British officials, army officials, people from elsewhere in the empire. I had only been in Virginia, save for a handful of trips across to Maryland, and I had not really traveled terribly far before that. I also got to be there. My brother married quite well. He married into the Fairfax family, and his wife's uncle was down there, and he was quite well to do, and so I was invited to be a part of the aristocracy there. I attended theater, which started a lifelong love for histrionics. I attended that. I also was able to, one of the things that my mother did for me is she did insist that I take dancing lessons. And so I was able to attend dances and balls, and I think hold my own reasonably well there. However, these were all things that I had experienced in a smaller way, but here I had only been to Williamsburg, and Williamsburg was a village compared to where I was staying in Barbados. So there were many things that I opened up to with travel, and then of course, when the war broke out, now friends, you have to keep in mind, in my day, the average person lives and dies inside a 30-mile radius. People don't travel terribly far. If you live just down the road, far out, 5-10 miles out of town, you don't go to town very often. And once the snow comes, you don't go to town at all. So we are not a terribly well-traveled, obviously there are exceptions, sailors and soldiers and the like, but once the war began, you want to talk about a shock. You thought Barbados was shocking. Going from Virginia to Massachusetts, one of the greatest shocks that I've ever had. The culture up there was very different. You have to keep in mind that our grandfathers were at each other's throats in a series of civil wars back in England. So we were very, very different people. We were descended from different people. But that tends to open up one's eyes to possibilities. I would recommend it to anyone.
One more question about Barbados. There you saw some of the large British forts. Probably
Yes.
You had not seen any of that size before.
No, well, and indeed, we certainly did have some fortifications here. We had some cannon emplacements on key rivers and things like that in case the French or Spain were to come up and attack us. We didn't have anything like these forts. No, that was certainly seeing some of the engineering, and that is one of the things we lacked. Talking about experts during the war, one of the things we lacked is we had to import foreign officers to be our engineers. We had no engineering school in America yet. I had proposed that perhaps we start one, which is sort of in progress now, but there was no, I had never had occasion to see, as you say, any large fortifications like this. So that was certainly an education in and of itself.
Do you think the sights that you saw in Barbados stimulated a move toward your future military career or not?
I think that my brother's service in the War of Jenkins' Ear and his serving under Admiral Edward Vernon, from which Mount Vernon takes its name, had probably more of an influence. But certainly, talking with the British officers there did absolutely. I had already the fuse had already been lit, if you will. And again, I was 14 when I tried to join the Royal Navy, so I had already set my sights on that. But certainly, I think what you're saying, meeting with those men and also seeing those military works, did reinforce that and push me in that direction. You are correct, sir.
So I'm guessing that you are one of the most well-traveled citizens of the United States in these days. I know, so say a little bit about
My tours?
your tours during your presidency. In your first term, I think you visited all 13 of the states.
Yes, although Rhode Island almost did not make it as they had not ratified the Constitution, and I was not going to visit Rhode Island until they signed. So I desired for the American people to be able to meet their president, because most of them had not even had occasion to see a sketch of me. They certainly knew nothing. They may have heard of me because of my service in the war, of course. But if they lived on the frontier, they never had reason to encounter me unless they fought in the war under me. And I wanted to make sure that they had a chance not only to see what I looked like and hear what I had to say, I also wanted to hear what they had to say. The Constitution was brand new. This was still an experiment. We talk about experimental farming. The country was still an experiment at this point. I wanted to see what their opinion of it was. I wanted to see if it was being received favorably, if they thought it was being implemented, because keep in mind, the Constitution may be amended. It wasn't working, we needed to fix it, because we desperately needed to have a stronger central government. So I went upon 3 grand tours. The first was through New England, and the second was just Long Island, which takes some time if you've ever been there, and then throughout the South, of course. And then I did also I did a separate trip for Rhode Island when they finally ratified.
And I hear that you stayed in public inns.
I stayed in public houses. I stayed in public houses almost exclusively, and I tried never to stay 2 nights in the same place. So if you've ever seen a plaque that says George Washington slept here, the reason is because I tried to sleep someplace different so that I was publicly accessible. And also, I had my itinerary printed up in local papers, so you could find out when General Washington is going to be here and you could come visit me.
So I do talk a little bit about your presidential tours in this book,
Yes.
and quote a little bit from your journal of the Southern tour, and you had a mishap where you almost perhaps drowned.
Oh, yes.
It was in Virginia, right?
Oh, it was not. It was in Southern Virginia, and it was. Yes, we there was a situation we had, and well, you may not know this, but if you travel south from here, if you travel north from here, the roads are not terrible. If you travel south from here and there's been any rain at all, it's terrible. And of course, the rivers run higher and all of that, and so yes, we did encounter a problem. And I know there are these paintings of me on white horses, and what would happen every time that I seemed to travel was I would be in a carriage, perfectly comfortable. I had a nice carriage that had been built in London with springs, you can imagine, metal springs that would bounce along the road so that it was a little gentler ride. As we get older, we don't necessarily want to sit in a saddle for 10 hours a day. But I was taking a carriage to the south, and we trying to cross one of the bodies of water, and we came very close to getting swept away, and that was because of the excessive rains there had been, and also because the roadways had been so washed out as well. So and because of that, I will admit a bit of impatience on my part, and perhaps rushing the crossing because we had been delayed because of the rains on the roads.
I want to be mindful of your time,
Of
sir,
course.
but
I appreciate
there's
that.
one final way in lifelong learning that you practiced, and that was innovation and experimenting. You
Okay.
experimented, you mentioned this a little bit earlier with your agricultural practices.
Oh.
But you could mention the 16-sided barn maybe, or mules,
Mhm.
things like innovations like that.
Well, the 16-sided barn is for the threshing of wheat. So, for those of you not farmers, we don't eat most of the stalk of wheat. We don't eat any of the stalk of wheat. We only eat the germ, the kernel on the top. And this has to be separated from the rest of the wheat. And there are 2 ways that this is done. Flailing, which is you literally hit it with a stick. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially you're just beating it. Or treading, you can walk on it to free it up. Those are the 2 ways that you can free the germ from the stalk, separate the wheat from the chaff. And the problem is, if you're going to flail it, that takes human effort, and that works quite well to separate it, but it takes a human to do that. If you're going to tread on it, it takes, you can do it with your own feet, but it's better to do it with some sort of hooved animal, And that's very slow because you have to run them sort of over it and back again and everything like that. It takes a long time. I thought, and of course the problem is the flailing of wheat is done outdoors. I thought, well, we lose about 50% of our wheat to the weather outside, whether it gets caught in the rain before it can be pulled inside someplace, or whether it's just the dampness in the air seeps into the kernels and it rots them before they can be made into flour. And so I thought, let's move this indoors. I had converted years before from tobacco, so I had all these tobacco drying barns, and I thought this would be perfect for the threshing of wheat, for flailing wheat. Well, I put people in there, even with cloths tucked around their faces and everything, they still would choke because it would put so much of the chaff into the air. I thought that doesn't work. And treading, again, you could do it indoors, but it was very slow. So the 16 side, what if those animals could walk in a circle? There could be on the second floor, and there could be slats with 1.5 inches in betwixt them. And as they walked on the grains, just in a circle all day long, it would drop down into the granary below, and then the chaff could be swept out up top because only the heavier kernels would fall. And so that is where the 16, essentially a round barn, but it's hard to make something round, so it's 16-sided. That's where that innovation came from.
One final thing I wanted to read. I'll read something from my book in regards to the type of labor you used in slave labor.
Yes.
But you were very interested in finding a way to transition to free labor, if you could, I believe. So George returned home in March 1797 after serving 2 terms as president. He needed to give thought to the future of Mount Vernon and those living there. One of the many challenges that continued to puzzle him involved his views on the use of enslaved labor, which had been evolving. He sought a way to demonstrate farming without reliance on slavery. He was determined to find a way to free the people he enslaved at Mount Vernon, and cautiously hoped the state legislature would move to gradually end slavery in all of Virginia.
First, even my wife does not call me by my first name, so she calls me General. However, I have the use of over 300 people on this property. Again, 8,000 acres. I have the use of over 300 people. However, I own outright 123 of them. Some are rented, but the bulk of them, about 150, belong to my wife's first husband, Daniel Custis. He died without a will. And because of that, I hope you all have wills. Because of that, his property was divided up according to the laws of Virginia. And that meant that Mrs. Washington, the widow Custis at the time, got 1/3 of his property for her use during her lifetime. That included the slaves that he owned. At that time, I believe it was 89 people. When I married the widow Custis and turned her into Mrs. Washington, I then had the use of that because I obviously was controlling her property once we were married. It's just the way the law works. And so those, we could not do anything with that 150, with those 150 people. We could not sell them unless we were compensating the Custis estate, because upon Mrs. Washington's death, they pass on to Custis descendants. So they pass on to the grandchildren of her first husband at this point. We couldn't, if they ran away, we were responsible for compensating the estate for the loss. So we did not have a way, unless we could find a way to buy them outright. Now, I have put into my will that the 123 people that I have control of should be freed upon Mrs. Washington's death. However, these groups have intermarried with one another. So when that moment happens and they are freed, their spouses, in many cases their children, will go on to Custis descendants and will be left behind. It will be dividing families upon. So I did not wish to have Mrs. Washington suffer that, and so that is why I put it in the will that they should only, if I predecease her, that they should be not freed until her death. Now, I have many lands in the west, in the Ohio Territory, in the Ohio River Valley, and I am hoping that I could possibly sell those lands in order to compensate the Custis estate, purchase those people, and then I could free them. But 'tis 150 people. Over that many years, 89 people became 150 people. it is unlikely I will be able to complete that work in the years that I have left upon this earth.
Thank you. So when we talk about grand experiments, certainly this was not yours alone, but the grandest of all, of course, is this new nation that we live in at the moment.
Yes?
You must be proud of, are you proud of your work to form a new nation? Are you
I am.
nervous about the future?
I am. I've spoken of this at great length, certainly when I left the presidency. My farewell address warned of some of these things. I do believe that there may be a division coming in our nation. I do not know whether it will be between North and South or East and West, but because of the differences in the economy of the people, part of which, of course, is based upon slave labor, there is also the danger that we will fall to alliances with foreign nations, or, for example, the Western territories may decide that they will be better off with Spain because of the Mississippi River and the navigation, which is controlled by Spain. So it is possible that those people living in what we now call Kentucky will choose to be a part of the Spanish Empire rather than the United States. So I fear that there will be some sort of division, and I fear that we can lay that division partially at the feet of economics. So if we can bind the economics of the nation together, I feel that we will be more unified as a people. But I think one of the greatest threats to our unity is what we call factions, but I believe you call political parties. And I think that the way to avoid that, perhaps, if I might give you some parting advice, is remind your elected officials that they are in fact your servants, that they work for you. They do not work for a party. They work for the people who elected them to their office.
Thank you very much for your time. Do we have time for a few questions? These good people might have a few questions.
I believe I have a few minutes. I do have other engagements this day, but I have time for a few questions.
If anybody has questions for the general.
General, could you talk us through your decision-making of why only 2 terms? Because at that point,
I did not want to serve one term. As a matter of fact, if you ever find someone who wants to be president, don't vote for them. I had thought, I did not wish to stand for election. I did not wish to become the president of the United States. I wanted to retire here and continue my pursuit in farming. I think you can probably, just from the way I've answered questions, realize that the one that got me most excited were Mr. Grove's questions about farming. I thought that I would serve for 2 years. I was convinced, yes, I was convinced that I was the only person that everyone could agree on. And there were certainly many precedents that had to be set. Again, this was an experiment, as you mentioned. The Constitution was all an experiment at this point, hadn't been done. I thought it would serve for 2 years. Yes, I know, 'tis a 4-year term. I thought surely after 2 years, everything shall be in place and in motion, and I can resign in favor of the vice president. No, it was not to be. And then as I approached the end of my first term, I had James Madison draft a farewell address for me. I thought I was going to be leaving the presidency. I only intended to serve 1 term. I thought that's all that was required. And then my Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, my Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, both came to me and said that the nation would fall apart if I did not stand for re-election. As I mentioned, those men never agreed on anything. And since they agreed on this, I thought I should listen to them. And I served a miserable 2nd term. And had I served a 3rd term, I would be divorced. Also, I was 65. That is far too old to be president.
Sir, you decided to go to battle against your citizens in Western Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
There had been a tax levied on the production of whiskey. I should point out that I am the largest whiskey producer in the United States, and my whiskey is available in the gift shop. However, this tax was levied by Congress upon whiskey. This was part of Alexander Hamilton's plan to try to rein in the finances of our nation, because we not only were we out of money and with no real way to generate money, but also we had no credit on the international stage. So we needed to do something to rein in finances. There was to be a tax upon whiskey. And the farmers in Western Pennsylvania that had been relying upon this, because Western Pennsylvania is far removed from any port. So in order to transport their grain and make it effective to sell it, turning it into whiskey means it doesn't spoil, so it doesn't rot by the time you get it to market. So whiskey was a way to transport this. They felt that this was very similar to the whole reason we'd fought the American Revolution in the first place, except that this was not taxation without representation. This was taxation that was levied by their elected officials. So yes, we had them in open rebellion, not only refusing to pay taxes, but they were taking over government offices and they were threatening the lives of government officials. This is rebellion. And so I asked that the militia be raised, and I was given the power to command that militia, though I did not wish to take to the field. And so I ended up going out there, and essentially, fortunately, it was they backed down once they saw that they saw the army coming. Essentially, they backed down. I went out to most of the way to Western Pennsylvania. Did not go all the way, but I went out just so that they would know that my presence was there. And then by the time the army got there, they had more or less disbanded. But that decision was because this was one of the tests of the Constitution. Could we continue to stay a unit? We can't stay a unified nation if we don't all obey the laws. And the laws, whether you like them or not, the laws are there for all of us. So the key thing and the key difference is it wasn't a parliament 3,000 miles away that was passing these laws. It was actually the Congress of the United States that was passing these laws. So we needed to make sure that this cannot simply, the reason we abandoned the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union is because it was not a strong enough central government. We had to make sure that the government could actually enforce its own laws and edicts. It could raise money, because without the ability to raise money, a government really can't do much of anything. During the Articles of Confederation, during our Confederation period, we were dependent upon the Congress. The Confederation Congress had to request money from the states, and if they would like to take that money and build a road or someplace, then somebody doesn't get paid.
One last question, I guess we have time for over here.
Make it phenomenally good.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading this new book about yourself, General. And
As am
so I'm curious what you think it's important for people, especially younger people, to know about your life story that they're going to hear about in this book.
And let's hope it's in the book.
Well, indeed, let's hope. I think that what Mr. Grove has done here is certainly something that I would like to have a younger generation know about, because he's focusing on education, and he's focusing on the fact that even though I was not able to have a formal education, I still had ways that I could educate myself, and these ways to be educated are open to anyone who has a basic education. Some things are easier. Obviously, it's hard. Most of you probably can't go to Barbados on a whim, but I think that the fact that you can learn from a book, that you can experiment and innovate with things, you can ask experts, those things are open to anyone. And I feel that is something that is certainly covered in your book, sir.
Yes.
And I think that is something that is worth remembering for everyone, whether they are a child or no.
That was a good final question.
Did you put him there?
Thank you so much to both of you. General, we'll let you leave before I wrap up with the author here. So as I mentioned, today is the first day this book is available for purchase.
Your eyes are
and-
the first to see it.
Yes, and this is, and we are able to make sales right here at the table. Tim will be out there to sign books until 3:45. And so if you're there, or if you want to come back afterwards, there's also a special cookie treat for anyone who gets a book today.
I would also like to say what an honor it has been to work on this project, not only the book project, but the exhibition. I encourage you all at some point, maybe not today, but there's a lot to see in the exhibition, but it's a really wonderful new way to experience George Washington. And the book pretty much includes a lot from the exhibition, so.
It was a really fun project to work with you on, Tim.
Yep.
The exhibit and the book, I feel like were a real collaborative experience.
Absolutely, yep. So,
Absolutely. Thank you guys
thank you
so
all
much.
for joining us.